Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Fazbear Entertainment would like you to put your hands together for the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear.
Rewritten! Content warning. This video is not made for kids. It contains fictional depictions of mental illness, fictional VIOLENCE, and fictional ABUSE. The fictional characters in this story are heavily afflicted by the things that I have spelled out to you, and some of the inner monologue seems to suggest that they should be getting hurt like this, but that is absolutely not the case. Me portraying this ABUSE, or mental illness, is meant to show the audience how the illness, or ABUSE, feels inside of the mind of the afflicted person, so they can sympathize and maybe stop themselves from following a similar pattern in the future. Be careful if you are easily triggered. You're most likely about to enter the mind of someone who is heavily afflicted by illness and ABUSE. Viewer discretion is advised. It was reopening day, and despite an entire 3 days of a break, nobody in Bonnie's family had been ready for it. This morning, all of them got up automatically, already running off of the schedule that they had come to dread. Bonnie had woken up in Freddy's room. They didn't say a word as they got ready, catching sight of Chica, Roxy, and Monty out in the hall. Nobody in this building had slept last night. Chica took in breaths unevenly, her face frozen into terror, ripping chunks out of her feathery pink boa and chewing on something that sounded like a soda can. Roxy trembled all over, swaying back and forth. Both of her jade green eyes were restored by the technicians, but the pupils were reverted to the regular slits that marked that they weren't equipped with the X-ray feature that she had taken from the staff bots. Her claws raked through her hair again and again in attempts to flatten it, ripping out the strands that wouldn't cooperate, doing the same to her bushed-out tail. Monty was just quiet. He didn't look at any of them. Without warning, Chica fell into Freddy's arms, her whimpers muffled into his chest. Roxy abruptly hurried up the stairs, staggering as she went. Monty followed shortly after, pressing his palms into his ears. Even when Chica eventually let go, Freddy stayed at the bottom of the stairs, stuck to the spot like he was ankle-deep in newly dried cement. Freddy looked back to Bonnie. Knowing that they were about to be ripped apart from each other, they rejoined their hands. I'm so sorry, Freddy said, his voice worn down like crumbling old concrete. Do you think you'll be okay down here on your own? It was an empty question. Both of them knew that it didn't matter how Bonnie felt about it. But Bonnie did his best to look brave for Freddy, not wanting him to worry all day. Yeah, I'll be fine. I spent 5 years without anyone around. I think I'll be able to go a couple of hours. Bonnie had meant it to be more lighthearted, to try and act like they could all just laugh about it now. But when that comparison was sounded aloud, it only seemed to make Freddy even less willing to let him go. They embraced. Bonnie held on for dear life, trying to permanently imprint the feeling of him into his rusty metal. He would have to remember what it felt like. He would have to imagine it all on his own pretty soon, or... Freddy drew back long enough to unclip his hefty black Faz watch and hold it out to Bonnie. Keep track of the time with this, he said. It'll only be until 9 p.m. I'm sure you'll be fine, but... Bonnie accepted the gift, clipping it over his own wrist. They didn't say anything for a few seconds, no words able to convey how badly Bonnie wanted to go with him. Freddy nuzzled his snout into the side of Bonnie's face, not seeming to care that it left a streak of dark red rust on his nose. Then he slowly unwound their fingers, and they broke apart. It was such a simple action for Freddy to let him go, but already Bonnie had to suppress the rising panic that came from being unable to feel him, unsure if he would ever come back, scared that he would be left alone for so long he would forget what his face looked like. Freddy turned and left up the stairs, giving him one last weak smile before disappearing from view. Bonnie stood there, alone in the hall, a cold emptiness trickling through him like freezing cave water. There was no place for him in the Pizzaplex anymore. He would have to stay here all day without Freddy. That reality was slowly prowling closer and closer as the sounds of Freddy's footsteps faded, the scraping of the metal door and the clank of it shutting, finalizing this new, horrible life. Alone. That word echoed around his lifeless head casing. Alone. Alone. All alone. Again. But this was still better than going back down to the scrap dump. At least he could move. At least he wasn't submerged in a pile of mechanical carcasses. Bonnie tried to focus on that instead as he turned back to Freddy's room and left the empty yellow hall behind. It could be much, much worse than this. Even Monty's attraction itself felt out of place in the Pizzaplex. Freddy had the arcade, Chica had the kitchen, Roxy had the laser tag arena, and Monty had a raceway dressed up in a southern theme that didn't match the others at all. It was obvious that Monty was not made by the same person who made the others. He had a silly-sounding accent, the concept of the raceway itself was just barely small enough to fit in the confines of the building, and the area's theme was hundreds of years older than the others. The whole reason the pirate theme had been lifted off of Roxy was because of the age of that aesthetic, so it seemed unbalanced and contradictory to break that rule by plopping a similarly aged concept onto Monty anyway. And the idea behind Monty's attraction was just so much bigger than the space that they could work with. The crowded obstacles and props were always in the way no matter where he looked. A rattlesnake, then a dry shrub, then a cactus, then a scorpion, and a beetle, and a flower bud, and a cloud. So many things leaped out at him from the scenery that it gave him a headache just to take a glance around. The bowling alley really had been better for the Pizzaplex. But nope, Monty ruined that a long time ago. "Come on, hurry up!" Huxley demanded, flinging the rustic doors of Monty's oasis open. "We're already late!" Monty would have been more concerned about keeping up with the schedule if Huxley didn't say "we're late" every single day, no matter how quickly they had wrapped up the rehearsal. The animatronics were always woken up at about 4 a.m. by a piercing alarm that was so loud it made him feel genuinely nauseous, like someone was pouring live wasps in his ears. They had from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock to shower in the employees' bathroom and organize their areas in ways that the StaffBot's AI may have failed to, and by 6 o'clock they were expected to gather in the auditorium and wait for their managers to clock in and unlock the main doors. After the managers arrived, the rehearsal for tonight's show began. Sometimes it ended at 7, sometimes it crawled over that into 8, but no matter what, after the rehearsal was done, they had until 9 to playtest their attractions and properly open the Pizzaplex to customers. Monty really wished that they trusted them enough to do that whole process on their own, but Jeremy absolutely insisted that they have their managers breathing down their necks during the entire process of getting ready to open up the Pizzaplex. "Come on," Huxley snapped, making a sarcastically exaggerated gesture to enter the raceway. "Do you need to get your ears checked or something? I said hurry!" Okay. Monty ducked through the doorway. "Calm down already, I'm coming!" The painted orange sky was splattered all over the walls and ceiling, the pink beetle-shaped lights flickering on and beginning to twirl with dusky light. The raceway's track wound back and forth and folded in on itself like a viper, taking up every inch of space between the props and circling back around to the finish line in a perfect cycle. The foam that made up the fake sand squished beneath his feet as he passed up the empty metal bleachers, aiming for the building near the back where the carts were held. Huxley practically chased Monty as he made his way around the deep pools of the oasis, squeezing through the wooden doorframe of the garage. Like everything else here, its southern theme was displayed by iron nails, wooden porches, and patchwork yellow curtains, the electrical light on the ceiling disguised as a humming lantern. They didn't want to break the illusion, not even where Monty would usually not allow guests. Instead of looking up to see a line of race cars ready to be checked, the garage was empty of everything except the rows of tools studding the walls. Something cold dropped inside Monty's stomach as he remembered where the carts currently were. Where are they? Huxley's roar made Monty spin around. Where are the carts? Huxley's eyes burned with venom, his lip curling to show rows of crooked teeth. That image seemed to grow in Monty's mind, vivid and frightening in a way that he hated to admit to himself. They hadn't even started the workday yet, and he was already mad at him. Okay, Monty stammered, trying to gather his panicky thoughts. I know where they are. I'll go get them. He tried to slip back out of the garage, but Huxley took the remote out of his leather jacket's pocket, refusing to move out of the way. Where are they? Tell me, Huxley demanded. What, did you tear those up too? No, Monty said breathlessly, his talons digging into the shock collar as he braced for it. It's just, when Gregory was here, he was trying to, unlock the door by going through the warm-up protocol or something, and I was trying to scare him off by pulling the carts underwater. The last part of that sentence was stretched further and further until he could no longer find a better way to break the news to him. You're still underwater? No, just in the air pocket, Monty corrected, approaching the doorframe. I'll go get him. I'm sorry, I just forgot. Before he could push his way past Huxley, Monty screamed and fell to the wooden floorboards, clutching at his electrified throat. The shock collar's bite was so overwhelming, it felt like someone was scraping his brain out like the last drips of ice cream at the bottom of a tub. Everything was just so bright and loud, blasting away every coherent thought and filling the empty spots with nothing but insane, excruciating agony. Huxley held the button of the remote as he shouted at him, You went 3 days on break! 3! And you didn't think to maybe fix this until now? When the collar let him go, Monty pathetically gasped for air. He bit down on his gold tooth, trying to stifle the rising temperature beneath his shell. Don't yell back at him. It'll just get worse. Don't yell. I'll go get him, Monty said through gritted teeth. Huxley lowered down at him for several long moments, like he was trying to decide whether Monty's tone still wasn't meeting the standards of respect that he wanted out of him. Eventually, Huxley stepped aside, and Monty rose on shaky legs, diving into the nearest pool before Huxley could say anything else. Water enveloped him, the chill of it passing over his body in waves. The muffled burbling filled his ears, muting out all other sounds above the surface, letting him relax. He floated there for a few seconds, taking in the safety of the oasis, letting it wrap him up and stow him away from the rest of the world. And then it returned. The crunching, the squishing and cracking, the smell. He shuddered, trying to expel the noise from his ears with a snort of bubbles. Every nightmare that he had experienced since the 28th was filled with the memories of him carrying James's corpse to the exit. The poor kid's body had squelched and crackled like sodden popcorn at the bottom of a trash bag, pulsing with the critters feeding off of him, the subtle movements almost making it look like he was still alive. He tried to block it out, focusing on his task. With a few lashes of his tail, he corkscrewed downwards into the deep lapis blue depths, the light from the surface dappling his scales with pale rosy spots. James's blood was gone. It had been washed away, scrubbed and grinded off of his paint the moment the technicians got a hold of him and began repairing him at the end of that horrible night. It was gone. Clean. He was clean and safe in the water. When he reached the bottom of the pool, he changed direction and slithered into a tunnel, letting the darkness take hold of him. His glowing mechanical eyes didn't do much to scare the shadows, but he knew these tunnels like the back of his hand and was able to navigate through the passage, picking the right one that would lead to the air pocket. These underwater tunnels connected each of the different pools of the oasis, giving him a network where he could travel from one obstacle to the other without having to give up his position to the racing children. He felt along the smooth walls, the circular ceiling bumping against the pink frill at the top of his head. He eventually felt that concrete slab lift away from his back. He kicked off from the bottom and broke to the surface, snorting plumes of mist out of his nostrils as he took a moment to cool off. Yes, he was a robot, but the tank inside of him apparently couldn't circulate air enough to keep him from overheating if he stayed under there for more than 5 minutes. That was why this air pocket was here and opened up to the outside, to make sure that he didn't overheat and pass out while underwater and make his rescue nearly impossible. The smell of chlorine intensified, the ceiling of the air pocket reflecting a pattern of pale blue veins off of the rippling water. It was so early, not much sunlight was coming in from the tiny tunnel that led to the outside world, but he already knew his way around enough to go without the light's help. Monty found the concrete ledge and heaved himself up onto it, water trickling down between his scales and forming puddles on the floor. This was where he had taken Gregory before, and also where he left the 6 carts. He felt his talons along the piles of bent scrap metal, knocking over a few stacks of busted pipes and cracked wheels, discomfort rustling in him as he realized how much this pile had grown in the last few days. Huxley still didn't know that he stole scrap pieces from the pit and parts and services just so he could break something that wasn't alive. And frankly, Monty never planned on telling him. He would probably be very loud about this mess if he found out. Eventually, Monty's talons traced over a surface that wasn't riddled with bite marks, and he began to tug it towards the water's edge. Stupid. His head began to squeeze him tighter. Stupid. How could he have been so stupid? He had so much time to do this, and yet he still managed to forget somehow. Why did they not kill him? They had Bonnie back. Why didn't they switch them out? Bonnie would be so much better at this than him. Well, maybe not the swimming part, but at least keeping up with his own attraction. At least the bowling alley would have made sense in the context of the others' areas, rather than some weird cowboy land. The cold water took him again as he dragged the cart with him through the tunnels, having to hold it awkwardly in front of him just so that they could both fit through. Eventually, the filtered glow from the surface beamed down on top of him like a spotlight, and he kicked up from the bottom until he finally burst up into fresh air. He caught the last half of Huxley yelling something about how he needed to hurry up and get them all up here, that once again they were still running late somehow, even though they still had 2 hours to go before the place opened. Monty did his best to ignore his grating voice, chewing on his gold tooth to try and keep himself from pointing out that yelling at him wouldn't make him go faster. When he dragged the dripping cart into the garage, he went back down for the others, repeating the process until finally the 6th and final one was pushed up onto land and rolled through the doorway. "All right, now go! Hurry!" Huxley ordered him around the entryway. "Wipe them down or something! They're not supposed to be wet!" "Oh, really? That's crazy! I didn't realize they were supposed to be dry! You're a genius!" Monty snapped back. "Don't take that tone with me, asshole!" The sound of Huxley's stamping boots made Monty tense. "You're the genius for forgetting that the main part of your attraction wasn't even here!" A sharp whack struck Monty's calf, making him spin around to see that Huxley was wielding a crowbar, probably one that he retrieved from the garage. The place where he had struck him throbbed of reignited soreness, being Huxley's favorite place to hit him when Monty wasn't going fast enough for his taste. Even though Monty wanted to swing the empty cart at Huxley in response, he knew better than to hurt his manager. If he retaliated, Huxley may break his fingers again and make him wait in parts and services until spare parts arrive. His manager always had an arsenal of creative punishments, and Monty was not eager to unlock the next one. Monty yanked a towel off the wall and started smothering each of the carts with it, working it into every crevice that he could reach. Huxley still somehow found places where he missed a spot, pointing at each one with the crowbar, criticizing his technique every step of the way as if he could do any better. His mind wandered as he worked, a mistake that he would come to regret many times over once the day was done. The smell of James's body. He remembered it clearly, the traces of it permanently scorched into his nostrils. It was dark and pungent, a toxic mix of decay and sickly sweetness that overwhelmed his senses and caused illness to roll inside of him. The smell of death had only gotten stronger when he had tried to pick James out of the box, the shift in James's remains loosening up extra pockets of the poisonous air, sending plumes of it up into his mouth like smoke from a campfire. Huxley struck his toes with the crowbar 2 more times, and it took all of Monty's self-control not to kick his manager in the face. The pressure inside of his gut was already reaching a boil, but Monty didn't want to have an incident before the day even started. Huxley just got to do that if he was angry. That was how the world worked. Monty curled his tail around his legs and grew rough with the carts as he moved on to checking each of them to make sure that they were going to run okay. Come on, you gotta hurry up! We've already wasted 30 whole minutes! Huxley continued to hound him as Monty carefully examined each vehicle, relieved that they turned on with the signal from the starting match, rechecking each seatbelt and safety harness and wheel lock. Monty's warning was just a constant swirl of Huxley telling him that he was doing it wrong, that he was being too sloppy. To do that again, you didn't do it good enough the first time. Listen to me when I talk to you. Quit giving me that attitude. Pay attention. Stop being klutzy. Shut up and hurry. Then why not bring back Bonnie? He just kept asking himself that. Why not switch them out? If Bonnie got his bowling alley back, the others would be a lot happier. At the very least, then the theme would match the rest of the lobby. Okay, done! Monty stepped back from the carts as he finished the test race and returned all of them to the starting line. He straightened up and faced Huxley, who was still standing behind the booth with a frown peeking out from his black beard. Did you check the brakes? Yes. Did you check the sensors at the Oasis? Yes. Did you check the locks on the wheels? You saw me check the locks on the wheels! Don't argue with me, just answer my question! Yes, I checked the locks! Monty went stiff at the look Huxley was giving him, regretting the agitation in his tone during the last confirmation. He looked down at his feet, the corrosive energy inside of him eating him up from the inside out. Alright then. We got 20 minutes until the doors open. You can go. The moment those words left Huxley's mouth, Monty had turned and plunged back into the Oasis. The water embraced him with its chill, drowning out the sound of his manager's voice. He let himself drift as the bubbles of his entrance trickled up from his joints and merged into the silvery surface above. The smell of chlorine pressed in at his closed nostrils, his metal body lighter and slower like he was exploring in outer space. Don't think about the sound, don't think about the smell, don't think about the stains on your claws. Why hadn't they scrapped him? If Bonnie was here, it's not even an if, he is here. And they just left him down there in their room anyway. What if Bonnie just started freaking out? He and Freddie had been inseparable since Bonnie came back, not just because of how much they liked each other, but because of psychological necessity. Bonnie couldn't be alone for more than a few minutes before... Monty tried not to think about it. He circled the various pools for as long as he could, poking up to the surface only to take a deep breath and then dive back down, trying to go fast enough that Huxley didn't have any time to invent some other chore that they needed to redo again. Eventually, the rest of the world busted in on his calm suspension when he heard the distant splashing at the surface. Monty stayed huddled at the bottom for a few more seconds, trying to pretend that he hadn't heard it. When the splashing got louder, Monty exhaled deeply, the bubbles rising above his head. He chased them until he finally broke back to the surface, immediately met by Huxley, who had been kicking his heel into the water to get his attention. There you are, Huxley huffed, rubbing the boot on the fake sand. Come on, your first group is here. And so it began. Welcome to Monty's Raceway! Are you ready to rumble? The recording of that announcer was so loud it was almost a physical force, shooting through his ears like a bullet. He covered the sides of his head too late, trying to give a casual smile and pass off the reaction as him trying to adjust his hair. Just be cool, smile, pretend like everything's fine. Flashes of children swirled all around him, while he did his best to show all of his teeth without accidentally making a scary face. A non-scary face was something about the edges of his lips. He had to turn them upwards, but not too much upwards. Something about squeezing his eyes just the right amount. Huxley had tried to drill the expression into him many times before, but somehow Monty always seemed to mess it up, making a scary smile instead of a good smile. The kids piled into the carts, fighting over who got to get which one, while Monty took the chance to slip back into the Oasis. Staying to talk to the children before the race usually never helped. He was better at just being the big bad alligator in the water. The first round began after the lights flashed green, beginning the cycle that was just as grueling as it was when they had left off 2 weeks ago. He swam between the tunnels, occasionally taking a few breaths from the air pocket, lurking just beneath the surface until he felt the vibrations of their carts rumbling close. Then, in one burst, he would lunge out of the water and block the closest cart that he saw, sometimes having to catch them so they didn't crash, the kids trying to steer their way around him as he made fake snaps at their bumpers. He caught glimpses of red faces and screwed up mouths, then disappeared beneath the water to escape them. Little kids. James had been just a little kid. He had been so small, barely even bigger than his arm, and the way that he was falling apart in his hands. Monty dug grooves into the concrete wall, trying to shake the invasive feelings off. He whirled around to shoot through the next tunnel, trying his best to set his mind in the present. Come on, he was falling behind. He was supposed to be making the race difficult to disguise how boring it really was. Noise slammed into his ears when he surfaced again, the lights blaring in his eyes as he blocked the path, a few of the padded carts bonking harmlessly into each other as they tried to get out of his way. Their squeals overloaded his sensors, and he dunked himself back beneath the water, his head ringing from the shock of it. Just keep going. Just keep going. He was a little late on the next resurfacing, only catching the one that was in last place. Again, more piercing screeches, more blazing lights, and he went back under to dispel it. He began to try and tune out what was going on around him, his mind drifting to escape the din of sound above him. How are the others doing? Even if he did have the time, he wouldn't be able to visit them anymore to find out. Not after the incident with Roxy. He placed a hand on the side of his face, where her claws had slashed into his scales. The muffling of the water let the memories of what had happened pull themselves closer and closer, only for them to be knocked off balance by the fear in Roxy's voice when she told him to leave her behind on the bridge and let her fall. He honestly didn't know what Roxy thought of him now, or the others. They probably hated him even more because of how long they had had to interact with him on that night. Monty realized he was late on the last pond and dove through the final tunnel, bursting up from the water and digging his talons harmlessly into the fake sand as the last cart passed him by. Knowing what came next, he quickly shoved his head back under the water to block the sounds of celebration. Even beneath the surface, the sharp whistles and whoops and hollers needled into his ears, the victory tune from the overhead speaker sending the bass line vibrating through his scales. So loud. Why did everyone have to be so loud all the time? He dragged himself out of the water when things had returned to a bearable volume, going through the scripted response of congratulating the winner with the not-scary smile, encouraging the ones who came in last and sending them off so the next group could come in. And now he was back in the oasis, ready to start it all over again. Hooray. As Monty swam through tunnel after tunnel, repeating the routine, a pinching ache began to poke him in the chest, coupled by a deep weight. He let his head float at the surface of the water, thinking that maybe he was not getting enough air to cool himself off, but soon recognized that the pain wasn't physical. Back under the water, he tried to figure out what the discomfort was. Was Bonnie alright down there? If Bonnie couldn't handle being alone, things would have already gone wrong by now. Why didn't Miller switch them out? Maybe it was because it would be too expensive to take down the raceway and replace it with the bowling alley again? That was probably it, actually, but that didn't mean that the logistics made it a good decision. If Monty had felt out of place before, it was made 100 times worse now that the struggling family was fully aware that they had options now, and yet Miller still chose the worst one. He surfaced, scared the kids, went back under when they started shrieking. They were so loud. He knew he was supposed to like kids, but their tiny voices rose to the octaves like a piglet on helium, spearing a hole through his eardrums, or whatever the robot version of eardrums were. He drifted through the pool, growing distracted by the pattern of light that was shining down from the surface. It was a calming violet shade, a spiderweb of wavering light that at any other time would be admired by him. Instead, the movement only reminded him of maggots. Monty determinedly clamped his claws over his snout, trying to keep himself from letting out a breath. Even though he wasn't smelling anything but chlorine, the memory of it was still crawling up from his robotic lungs, making him shudder as the temperature of the water seemed to drop. The squirming of the light, the squirming of the maggots. They had been a fleshy orange color, all tied and knotted together, frantically writhing around when he made contact with James's body and disturbed their meal. His chest pulsated with newly rising cramps, and he gripped the edge of one of the tunnels, forcing his way through. He gasped for breath in the air pocket, but instead of escaping the image, it was only reinforced. The same pattern of squirming lines was reflected on the ceiling, the pale sunlight trickling in through the passage to fresh air. Monty snapped his eyes shut tight, his claws digging into the concrete ledge. Come on, pull it together. Why did it feel like his head was exploding? The sensation of sickening, vertigo-inducing pressure forced him to take increasingly frantic breaths, things getting out of control within seconds. The flies, the buzzing of flies, the dark, sickly stench rising from the carcass as he moved it around, as he tried to pick it up. He could feel the maggots, he could feel them squirming into the robotic breaks in his knuckles and fingertips. It wasn't just the moment that he picked up James's corpse. It was the moment in Parts and Services where Gregory peeled his face off to find 10 little severed fingers hiding in his head. How long had they been there? Was it after the chip or before? How long had he been carrying a dead kid's fingers between his eyes? What was happening? What was happening? He wasn't back there. James wasn't here. There weren't maggots in his hands. But he just couldn't stop exploding, breaking down. He didn't even know the name for it, but whatever it was, it just wouldn't stop. Monty shook uncontrollably as he dumped his hands back beneath the water over and over again, digging the edges of his dull claws into the breaks of his plating, trying to rid himself of the wriggling memories. When that didn't work, he just started bashing his face into the corner of the ledge. Before he knew it, he had risen out of the water and dug his claws into a random item in the pile of scrap metal, raising it above his head and slamming it down. The noise burst inside the tiny space, making him yelp and cover his ears, the clatter echoing through the tunnel of fresh air long after the impact had ended. Oh no. Did Huxley hear that? Wait, he was in the middle of a race! What was he doing down here? Monty tried to break through the haze of jittering noise that his head had conjured up, diving back into the water. When he surfaced, the crowd had already been cheering without him, immediately making him grimace and lower his head so his ears were hidden in the water. Loud. Everything was so loud. And then he saw the filtered silhouette of someone approaching the edge of the oasis. Great. Monty considered going back down and pretending that he didn't see him, but that would probably just make his manager even more mad. He slowly let his head drift back up to float on the surface of the water, immediately coming face to face with a fuming scowl. "Where were you?" Huxley hissed, trying to keep his voice down since there were still a few people wandering around the props. Monty didn't really have a way to explain what happened down there. Everything just felt so heavy and sticky, he had no words to describe it. I had to rest in the air pocket," he eventually stammered out. Huxley sighed through his yellow teeth, leaning back and taking a look around, his hands on his hips. He wasn't supposed to shock Monty while he was in the water, since that would apparently cause a whole lot of physical damage for some sort of sciencey reason that Monty didn't really understand. But there were still more kids coming in through the entrance, meaning that Huxley didn't have time to drag him up out of the water and into the garage out of view to punish him. That would have to be postponed until later, when things were less busy. "You can't just disappear," Huxley scolded, pacing around at the edge with the remote held like a knife. "You need to get over whatever stupid problem you're having and do your fucking job right. All you have to do is jump out at them. It's not that hard." Monty squeezed his eyes shut, nodding, his jaw patting in and out of the water with the movement. "Don't snap back. Don't say anything. Keep it inside." When he heard Huxley's footsteps stalking away, he dipped his head back under the surface and screamed as loud as he could. The sound was muted beneath the water, producing nothing more than a flurry of bubbles that rushed up past his face and rippled across the surface. He wasn't even sure why he screamed. It just felt like his chest was swelling to the point of bursting, like some sort of loose critter was scratching and digging its sharp little claws into him, so wild and fierce that he could hardly stand it. Literally the moment that he poked his nose up to take a new breath, the stupid announcer began blaring, forcing Monty to plunge downwards into the depths again, trying to hide away from the painfully loud racket. He did several circles around the oasis's edge, his tail lashing behind him as he tried his best to get away from the feelings that were swarming in him like an army of locusts. You just have to keep going. You had to keep going. If he messed up, they were going to throw Bonnie away. He was going to ruin it again. Monty abruptly backed up and then rammed his head into the concrete wall as hard as he could. The noise rattled through his whole body, and he saw stars as his vision slowly flickered back to normal. Stop being stupid, you're gonna ruin it! If he became the reason why Bonnie was taken away a second time... He burst up from the water when the carts passed. He scared the kids. They squealed. He escaped down into the water. The maggots, the way that they wriggled between the joints in his shell, the way they had tried to crawl up his arm. His head collided with the concrete again, this time into the top of a tunnel that he was squeezing through. He shoved his way out, then back up on the surface. Again, the lights and the sound, it tore through his head like the fangs of a rattler. Back down into the darkness. He would never be able to get the mental image out of his head, much less the feeling. The maggots had been trying to find a way inside of him, too, to find a new meal, still hungry for more despite how much they had been given. It still felt like they were there, too, no matter how many times he washed himself off during their 3-day break. Monty shook himself, his tail wrapping tight around his legs as his claws gripped at his scaly snout. What was wrong with him? Something was happening, something was going on inside of his head. It was just so painful, like rusty barbed wire tearing him from the inside out. He was going to ruin it. Bonnie would be thrown back into the dump because of him. Monty had been barely paying attention when he lunged from the water again, his eyes immediately scorched with hot pink light. He dove back underwater, the majority of it drifting far away. But that only allowed the memories of James's carcass to get closer. It was a ruthless back and forth, the two evils continuously refusing to let him believe that one was lesser than the other. He couldn't choose which one he would rather suffer with. Come on, he had to keep going. It wasn't that hard. Just diving up and down was the only thing that he had to do to keep Bonnie alive, and yet somehow he still couldn't manage to do that. What if the others thought that he did it on purpose? What if the others thought that he was jealous or something, or that he was worried about getting replaced? They would never forgive him. Bonnie would go back down to that horrible place, even though Monty was the one that deserved it. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Stop being stupid. Just jump in and out of the water. It's not that hard. Just do your job. Do something right for once in your life. He burst out of the oasis into the blinding lights and deafening noise, and then something hard ran over his claws, sending a bolt of agony twisting up his wrist. He roared in pain, whirling around to see who it was, catching sight of a kid in one of the race carts, one that hadn't gotten out of the way fast enough. All at once, every thought in his head erupted into one huge, overwhelming wave of spitting, hissing magma. How? Hey, what was that for? Monty snarled reflexively. Can't you watch where you're going? That's the one thing you're supposed to be doing in this stupid race, and you can't even manage that! Monty quickly ran out of breath, the next intake cold. He stopped, the burning heat melting into frozen shock at what he had just said. The kid's bottom lip began to tremble, her face slowly getting redder and redder until finally she burst into tears. Oh no, wait, don't cry, please don't cry. Monty reached towards the little girl, but she just shrieked even louder, the noise peaking into a painful ring that prickled its way behind his eye sockets like a cactus's needles, making him wince and draw back. Hey, get the hell away from her, get back! The parent, climbing down from the stands. A weight dropped inside of him like a broken elevator plummeting down to the ground floor. So much lights, so many faces, red faces, curling lips, peeling teeth, so much of them, so much. They were mad at him. He messed up so bad. Monty couldn't take it anymore. He retreated back into the water, swimming down so far he made impact with the bottom. He curled up into himself, his scales feeling like they were scalding, like the water around him was beginning to boil. He dug his talons into his face, bubbles streaming up from his nostrils as he tried to get a hold of himself. Stupid. He had been bad. Bonnie was going to be... The commotion above the water was muffled, but he knew that it would still be there when he inevitably had to go back up for air. I'm sorry, Monty kept thinking to himself, wishing that he could just drown at the bottom of this pool. I'm so sorry. Loneliness. Bonnie had grown to know the feeling on a horribly personal level. He thought that he had said goodbye to it weeks ago when he had been reunited with his family. But it was back now, worse than ever, like a newly cauterized injury that had been sliced open all over again. Bonnie spent the first 30 minutes or so just lying down in Freddy's bed, the deafening silence buzzing around him like a cloud of flies. If he strained his ears, he could hear the muffled hum of the pizzaplex above the ceiling, like the deepening rumbles of a laboring factory. His family was suffering up there. He couldn't do anything about it. The quiet crept up on him, slowly, so slowly that he didn't notice it at first. He shivered, darkness closing around his vision. The smell of rust drifted over his nostrils. Bonnie sat bolt upright, his entire body overcome with a repulsed shudder, trying to gag the scent out of his throat. No, he couldn't lie down anymore. Bonnie got up instead, beginning to pace in the small room. He still limped, even though the weight of his bowling ball arm was gone. The strained parts in his back and leg that had been ruined from lugging around the weapon's weight were all still damaged, like a tight steel cable that zapped and spasmed with every movement he made. But still, even with that, Bonnie couldn't stand still for a moment. He just couldn't. Heat began to build inside of his head. Bonnie kept shaking himself, trying to get rid of it. He took his ripped rabbit ears and began to pick at them. The torn fibers of fake fur caught beneath his nails, still dusted brown from rust. He stared down at his hand. The smear of black sent tremors up and down his body. He couldn't look away. He was breathing harder, chest thudding. It was happening. It was all happening again. No. His voice sounded so loud in the empty room. No, please, I'll do better, please don't. Bonnie's internal clock had broken several years ago, so instead he checked the time on the Faz watch. It was only 9:37 in the morning. Bonnie dropped down on the bed again, grabbing his ragged ears and pressing them into his face with his hands, feeling so... Bonnie curled in on himself and started weeping. There was no response. This was his life now. This was all of their lives now. Bonnie thought that he should be used to this feeling of helplessness already. It had been this way for 5 years, ever since Jeremy gained ownership of the company. They had never been asked for their opinions before being exploited for money. They had never been paid for their work. They never got breaks or days off. They had no rights. They were just fancy machines to the people who made them. Property. The managers were quick to give him a new shock collar. It was so tight, so heavy, he struggled to draw enough breath to stop the hot buildup in his chest, and the subtle threat that the weight carried was even worse. Bonnie had quickly learned in the first month that Jeremy took over that their new managers could at any time drag them backstage and electrocute them until they were begging for mercy. And nobody cared. They were never given justice. They were never apologized to. Victor wasn't coming to save them and give his son a stern talking to. The only people who really cared about them anymore were the children. But that was out of innocence, not realizing that they were just objects, only recognizing a colorful bunny rabbit and wanting to get a piggyback ride on his shoulders. But now, he couldn't even do that anymore. Panic buzzed like a swarm of cockroaches, worse and worse as he tried to wipe the rust off, ripping at his ears, trying to scratch it all away. Their managers didn't care about him. He was just a broken tool to him. He would never be able to work in the condition that he was in. He was only wasting storage space. They were going to scrap him the second the others gave them a reason. The moment that thought invaded him, he fought to push it away, but it was too deeply rooted already. Bonnie shot to his feet. He was panting hard now, the pain in his limbs searing up his back, every circuit in his body overcome with the horrible infection that dug its way through every wire, every piston, every fiber of his body until it had consumed him with a mad inferno. He had to get out of here. Okay, so if you guys haven't been keeping up with the community post, chapter 31 ended up being way bigger than I thought that it would be. I needed to divide it into 4 parts, and if you're thinking maybe that might be unnecessary, surely there won't be enough content for 4 parts. Whenever I put the entire episode together, it was 4 hours long, so I decided I didn't want to steamroll everyone with a 4-hour episode, and instead I'm going to be dividing it into 4 parts. So this was part 1, and if you want to stick with the actual story, you need to get to chapter 31, part 2, once it comes out. So when is part 2 going to come out? I've already kind of edited and finalized part 2, so next Sunday is when part 2 is going to come out. Usually I skip a week, except this time, since I already kind of have it ready, it's going to be just next week's Sunday. So yeah, just look out for part 2 next Sunday, and yeah, that's all I had to say. So, bye. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like and to comment about your favorite part. It's a really, a small amount of effort from you and only, 3 seconds of time, but it ends up really, really helping the algorithm so that I'm able to, get this story out to other people. So, if you have the time, please make sure to show your support so that I know that you appreciate it and so that, this gets out to other people. So, yep, that's all I have to say. Bye. Thank you for watching. I love you guys.